Hi. Okay, the first thing you want to do is get your pattern paper. Now, once you have that ready, from one end of the pattern paper, measure out your front waist length. Next, measure out the shoulder slant. The shoulder slant by standard is 1 inch. So from where you measure the front waist length, measure 1 inch down and run a straight line. Next is the across chest line. Now to get this line, you measure from the end of your shoulder to where the armpit starts. Typically, it is 5 inches. After that line is your armhole line. Now the armhole line is from the end of your shoulder to where your armpit ends. So the curve of your armpit where it ends, that's where you have your armhole line. The next line is your bust line. Now that bust line is taken from your shoulder to the fullest part of your bust, generally the nipple. So from shoulder to nipple, you have your bust height, and that's what you should measure out from the highest point of your shoulder to your nipple. So now we have all the necessary fitting lines for a flat bodice pattern. That's the first thing we are going to create. And after creating the flat bodice pattern, we will now proceed to creating a princess cut bustier. Now let's begin to create our flat bodice pattern. You should mark out the neckline first. Now your basic neckline should be 3 inches from the center. And that's what has been marked there. From this point to this point is 3 inches. After doing that, mark out your shoulder line. From the end of your paper to where that line is your shoulder line divided by 2. Mark it out. The next thing we're marking out now is the neck depth. For this pattern, you can just use 2.5 or 3 as your neck depth. Connect the neck depth to the neck width with a curve. You can use your curve set or you can use freehand. Now from the neck width to where we marked the shoulder width, connect with a straight line. Next, on the across chest line, measure out your across chest divided by 2. Your across chest is the measurement you take from armpit to armpit at the front above your bust. Connect this to the shoulder point with a straight line. Now on the bust line, measure your bust circle divided by 4 and mark it. On the bottom of your pattern paper, which is serving as our waistline, measure out your waist circle divided by 4 and mark. Now connect both points with a straight line. Extend that straight line up all the way to the armhole line as shown. Now connect these 2 points with a curve. At this point, we have now created our flat bodice pattern for the front. So all you need to do now is follow the black line and cut out. You can use this pattern to create your back pattern. It's time for us to move forward with our princess cut bustier. Now the first thing you should do is mark out your under bust line. That is from the highest point of your shoulder to under your bust. Now on the bust line, remember our bust line, measure out the bust distance divided by 2. That is from nipple to nipple divided by 2. Also on the waistline, measure out the bust distance divided by 2 and mark. Now connect both points with a straight line. Next, from the across chest line, draw a curve to connect to the line you just created. Now we are going to do a little calculation. For this calculation, we will need two measurements. The first one is from the highest point of the shoulder to under the bust. You take this measurement over the bust, and then you take from the highest point of the shoulder to under the bust, but this time beside the bust. Now subtract both measurements. What did you get? Whatever you got is what we are going to measure from the armhole line up and then mark. From that point, join with a curve to the bust line. For the next measurement, we are going to do another calculation again. For this one, you take your bust circle and your under bust circle. Now subtract your under bust circle from your bust circle. So bust circle minus under bust circle. Whatever you get, divide it by 2. What did you get? Whatever you got, go to your under bust line, and then from the line we've already created, measure what you got and mark. Take the same measurement on the waistline and then connect both points with a straight line. Once that is done, connect the bust point to that point you just created with a curve. Now cut along all the black lines. We are not done. The next thing you're going to do now is take this pattern and place on another pattern paper in exactly the same arrangement. Once you have this on your pattern paper, your new pattern paper, what you will do now is to add all the allowances we lost while creating the princess cut bustier. So first, measure what you lost at the waistline, that is this point, and then add it to the waist. Next, measure what this took out of the bust line. So you measure from here to here and then add it to the bust circle. Connect to the new waistline with a straight line and then complete the armhole as well. Cut out the new pattern on the new pattern paper, and now you have this. So you can take out the old pattern paper and you have your princess cut bustier pattern ready. Now over to the fabric. What you do is to fold it and then align the pattern to the side of the fabric that you folded. Now add 1/4 inch allowance around the pattern as shown in the video. To ensure that this part of the bustier matches with the other part of the bustier, you're going to take that part and then measure along this point. Whatever you get, measure it on this other side. If there is need for extra to complete the measurement, then add that extra at the top as seen in the video. Add 1/4 inch allowance to the shoulder and then join. Connect with a line to the pattern shoulder as shown, and now you're ready to cut your fabric. Take the pattern out, and now this part of the bustier is ready. Over to the other side. So with another fabric folded in 2, you're going to place the pattern of the other side on it. Add all the necessary allowances, 1/4 inch around the bust line, 1/2 inch at the bottom, 1/4 inch round the armhole, and then 1 inch at the side for sewing allowance. Once that is done, you can now cut out the fabric and then take off your pattern. Now for clients whose waist is bigger than their under bust, there is one more thing you need to do. Mark out the under bust line. What you are going to do now is take the person's waist, divide it by 4, whatever you get, take note of it. Take the person's under bust circle, divide it by 4, whatever you get, take note of it, and then subtract. Whatever you get from this end of the line, mark it out. You are now going to cut from this end to the point you marked, and from the point you marked to this end. This step is only necessary if you are dealing with a client that their waist is bigger than their under bust. If that's not the case, then stick with what we had earlier. We have successfully cut our princess cut bustier on the fabric. So now we're going to go over to the back. For the back, remember the flat pattern we created earlier? You're going to take the second copy we made and we're going to use it to draft the back. So place it on your fabric and then mark out your zip allowance. It should be 1 inch. At the bottom, Mark out your sewing allowance. From the edge of your pattern, measure out 2 inches. 1 inch is your sewing allowance and 1 inch is the allowance for your dart. At the armhole line of your pattern, add 1 inch for sewing allowance. Connect both points with a straight line. Add 1/4 inch sewing allowance round the armhole line. If the back width is different from the across chest, then take your back width measurement, divide by 2 and mark. That will become your new armhole line. If both the across chest and back width are the same, then continue with only the allowance. Connect to the shoulder line of the pattern and then draft your back neckline. It should be 1/2 inch deep. You can now cut the fabric along those lines. Trace out your zip allowance on the fabric. You can now take the pattern off. Next thing we'll be doing now is to mark out the dart point. To do that, take your waist circle, divide it by 8. Whatever you get, measure from this point and mark it out. Next, you mark out your dart size. Now, if you remember, we added 2 inches allowance to the side when we're cutting on the fabric. 1 inch was for the dart and 1 inch was for sewing allowance. So that 1 inch for the dart is what we are going to mark now from this point to here. At this point, we are done with the back of the bodice. But if you are dealing with a client whose waist is bigger than their underbust, then you should do this next step. Mark out the underbust line. From this point on that line, measure out your underbust circle divided by 4 plus your 1 inch sewing allowance and then mark. You can now cut from the armhole line to that point and from that point as well to the waistline. You can skip this step if your client's waist is not bigger than their underbust. So now we have the back of the bodice ready. This should be times 2. Now you're ready to put all the parts together and create your princess cut bustier.